Welcome back, beautiful people. This is Imperfect Progress with your host, Hennessy, a safe space to dive into the experiences, feelings, and tools that make up a full and flawed life. Today, we're talking about self-compassion. Starting in the 80s, psychologists, therapists, and teachers started pushing the self-esteem movement. And the Oxford Dictionary defines self-esteem as confidence in one's own worth or abilities. Self-respect. Having good self-esteem, not so high that you think you're better than everyone, but not so low that you think you're less than everyone, is valuable. However, it does not always feel attainable, especially for people who struggle with a mental or physical health issue. Anyone can have poor self-esteem, and everyone probably has at some point. But I know that mine plummets further down when I'm in the midst of a depressive episode or a season of injury or illness. And there are plenty of mantras, self-help books, TED Talks, and songs that encourage us to love ourselves. And while we might want to boost our feelings of self-worth, we often don't know where to start. Boosting self-esteem has always seemed tricky to me because the whole conundrum of low self-esteem is that you don't feel or think you are valuable. So how am I supposed to think about my 3 best qualities or reasons why I like myself? Now, over time, I developed a quick list of responses to these questions based on what other people said or who I wanted to be, but I didn't believe them. They were just so I had an answer. I remember sitting in a group therapy session working on an activity where we were supposed to write 5 things that we liked about ourselves. Then we passed our paper around the circle and each person wrote 1 thing that they appreciated about us. Now, I had known these people for all of 48 hours. We were strangers. We grumbled and we complained while trying to pluck out things to write about ourselves. Some of us needed help from the facilitator to write even 1 attribute. And even then, we wrote it hesitantly, not fully believing that it was true. However, when it came time to pass our papers, we didn't have nearly as much trouble writing something kind about the strangers around us. And I just think, how interesting is it that we can know ourselves our whole lives and barely be able to write 1 thing that we like confidently, but we can meet a complete stranger and quickly see all the gold in them. The fact is that most, if not all, humans struggle with self-esteem at some point in their lives. We have moments of self-doubt. Some people experience chronic self-doubt and self-loathing. I was oh so blessed to be chosen as one of those special people. Now, there are a multitude of sources that our self-esteem issues stem from. There's unrealistic standards of beauty, demands on our time and our energy. There's comparison, family dynamics, negative words and experiences from our childhood, poor choices we've made, and many other little moments of hurt and disappointment that tear down our confidence. Low self-esteem is often accompanied by guilt and shame. We feel guilty for the things that we did or we didn't do, and we turn choices or experiences into pieces of our identity that we then shame ourselves for. We feel ashamed of who we are or of what we've done. This guilt-shame cycle drags our self-esteem even lower. So how do we change the narrative? How do we shift from shaming ourselves to loving ourselves in the moment? How do we reframe our self-concept from everything we're not to appreciating who we are now? How do we separate our experiences, thoughts, emotions, and choices from our core identity? The answer I have for you today is self-compassion. And you might be wondering, what makes self-esteem different from self-compassion? They both sound like they're about loving and valuing yourself. And the answer is, yeah, they're kind of similar. Self-esteem asks us to think and speak positively about ourselves, to present ourselves confidently to the world. Self-compassion is more about how we relate to ourselves in the moment. It can feel like a subtle difference, but they manifest in different ways. You see, self-esteem is evaluative. It asks us to take inventory of who we are and what we've done and declare ourselves as victors who are special and worthy. And it can feel like a competition. Now, we know that comparing ourselves to others in order to establish our value isn't helpful. But comparing ourselves to past or future versions of ourselves isn't helpful either. I remember post-college me comparing myself to sophomore year of college me and thinking, wow, that's when I peaked. I will never be as good as I was then. And my self-esteem just dropped further because I had weighed myself and found myself wanting, not just compared to societal norms or other people, but according to my own history and my own standards. And when our self-esteem plummets, we tend to judge ourselves, which only adds fuel to the fire. And the words that we use in our heads to talk about ourselves turn vicious. We use self-talk that is so damaging. I've spoken things to myself that I would never, ever, in all of eternity, even think about saying to or about someone else. We treat ourselves like some haphazard project that got thrown together and graded, and we live based off of what we think we earned on that grade. Instead of treating ourselves as complex, feeling, growing, developing living beings. On the other hand, self-compassion is relational. It asks us to connect with our feelings and needs in the moment, to sit with ourselves, to notice, to see, to listen to our thoughts. It asks us to treat ourselves as we would our best friend, or our sibling, or our child. We seek to understand our emotions and values. We approach our motivations and actions with curiosity. We meet our moods and choices with grace, and we respond to ourselves with kindness. It's not an overarching, lifelong evaluation of how we're doing in life's race or hierarchy. Instead, it's another way to practice being present with ourselves. I would never call my best friend a lazy, worthless slob if she needed a day to just be and eat junk food and sit on her couch without being productive. I would never call her a weak-willed hussy if she dated more people. I would never tell her that she's dispensable, and no one would really notice or care if she just disappeared. Yet, I've said these things to myself. Judgment and shame are toxic side effects to constant self-evaluation. Because the truth is that we can't be our 100% best selves 100% of the time. It's just not realistic. We get tired. We make mistakes. We say the wrong thing and react too quickly. We get sick. We feel sad. We feel angry. And self-compassion says that all of these things are acceptable pieces of being human. Self-compassion says that your value doesn't change based on your abilities or feelings, your positivity, confidence, or productivity. Instead, it accepts your inherent worth as a fantastic creation in a mysterious universe who has the great capacity for both light and dark. So what does self-compassion look like in the practical, everyday moments of life? Well, according to psychology professor Kristen Neff, self-compassion has three main pillars. There is self-kindness versus self-judgment, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus over-identification. Self-kindness leads us to accept that life will not always meet our desires or expectations, and it challenges us to treat ourselves gently through suffering and failures. On the other hand, self-judgment chooses to ignore our pain and criticize ourselves when life doesn't go as planned, leading us to lash out at ourselves and sometimes others. Now, practicing this pillar of self-compassion starts with noticing our thoughts and our feelings. I teach second grade. It is simultaneously a joyous privilege and an incredible challenge. At some point in my day, on any given day, I will start to slip into self-judgment mode. Maybe I reacted too harshly to a kid's behavior, or my lesson bombed, or I didn't feel like I gave that one student enough attention for them to be successful. Any moment can trigger the spiral. My old habit tells me to beat myself up and tell me that I'm being a bad teacher, that I am a bad teacher. But when I practice self-compassion, I notice and name how I feel in that moment. And the language we use while doing this is important because we want to stay away from saying things like, I am mad, I am exhausted, I am over this. We want to try and create some detachment between your sense of self and what you're feeling and thinking. And we can do that by replacing I am for I feel. So at work, I might say, I feel frustrated. I feel tired. I feel overwhelmed. And I separate myself from my thoughts. I take a step back to listen to what they're saying without attaching them to my identity. My thoughts are often saying, I need a break. I don't know what to do. I messed up. Why is today so hard? And my old habits would have evaluated these thoughts and feelings to label myself as weak and inadequate. But self-compassion teaches me to accept my current state by just saying it out loud. I notice that I feel overwhelmed. This day has been really hard. It sounds so simple and silly, but speaking this out loud to yourself brings a sense of validation. And when we don't acknowledge that we're struggling and we try to hide from it or fight it, it just makes that mental, emotional load even heavier. And by validating our own emotions, we're saying to ourselves, I see you. I hear you. You are not crazy. This is hard. The next pillar is common humanity. For some reason, our natural state is to believe that we are the only person who has ever made a mistake or felt this way. We isolate ourselves in our experiences, and that gives power to the dark clouds that are building up inside of us. Common humanity reminds us that there are no perfect people, that suffering and failing are shared experiences of all people, in all cultures, throughout all of time. And practicing this pillar of self-compassion, it starts by remembering that we are not alone. I used to have a very self-sufficient mindset. I think US culture tends to teach us how to be independent, and it pushes us to work hard and achieve success. And those things are not inherently bad. They can be so helpful. They can also be unhelpful when taken to extremes and when we don't balance them out with building community, taking care of ourselves, and just enjoying life. I've always lived with supportive people. My friends and my family are amazing. I've been very blessed in that way. But I haven't always capitalized on that resource because I know now that they would do anything it takes to help me. But I didn't used to want to tell them when I was muddling through a depressive episode or a struggle at work or a relationship issue because I didn't want to burden them with my problems. Instead, I would just shame myself for not being good enough to handle everything. And I told myself that I was the only person that I knew who had ever felt this way, the only person who had ever been depressed. And it was just too dark to share. So I isolated myself in my experiences because I thought that other people would judge me with the same harshness that I was judging myself. Now I can practice self-compassion by talking to my support system. I share when I'm having a dark day. I tell them what feels so hard about that moment. And it usually prompts them to tell me a piece of their own story. And I ask what they did. Now, sometimes we solve a problem, but most of the time, we're just bonding and relating to each other through a shared struggle. And that sense of isolation dissipates, and with it goes a piece of the cloud. It's beneficial to share what you're going through and ask others to be vulnerable, because it helps everyone to remember that you are not alone. No one is alone. Which is a quote from a song from Into the Woods, and you should go watch it if you never have, because it's lovely. And you might have felt alone in your experience, but like Emily Blunt sings, it's highly likely that the other person has felt just as isolated until you opened up. The final pillar is mindfulness versus over-identification. Mindfulness asks us to be present with this moment, this feeling, this thought. It seeks a balanced interpretation of what we're experiencing without exaggerating or minimizing it. Over-identification is where we claim our thoughts and feelings of the moment as absolute truth about life and who we are, which leads us to react in a way that's not consistent with reality or our values. But when we practice mindfulness, it increases our ability to exercise self-compassion because we're training our brains to sense things right now, around and inside of us as they truly are. A common mindfulness practice related to self-compassion is called RAIN. It's an acronym, RAIN, that stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and non-identification. The first letter, R, for recognize, prompts you to notice your thoughts and feelings with non-judgmental curiosity. A, allow, gives yourself permission to feel what you're feeling without trying to change it or make it go away. Like we said, fighting our feelings only makes them grow bigger and more out of control. And there's no way out or around those feelings, but feeling them and walking through them can move us forward. I, investigate, is where we ask ourselves questions in a caring, interested way. A few good questions to start with might be, how am I experiencing this feeling in my body? What part of me needs attention? What are my brain and body asking for? What do I really need in this moment? I try to stay away from asking why questions because they can be triggering and not as helpful when you're in the moment. Later, when you feel regulated and you're in a safe space for reflection, you can sift through the possible causes of that feeling so that you can work to soften the trigger's effect on you in the future. But asking why in the moment isn't going to help you feel better. Your brain isn't ready for that kind of rationalization. And finally, N, non-identification. This last step is where you explicitly say to yourself, I am having this thought or this emotion, but that does not mean that I am this thought or emotion. So I could say, I am feeling frustrated or I'm experiencing frustration, but that does not mean that I will always be frustrated, that I will always feel this way, that I'm a chronically frustrated person. Some of my favorite things to say during this last step are, this will pass. This is just a moment. This is temporary. It reminds me that while I might feel like I'm in a never-ending thunderstorm, the reality is that thoughts and emotions come in waves, and the tide always washes out eventually. You can also give the N a second job, nurture. Sometimes we seek nurture and support from our loved ones, but it is also valuable to learn how to self-soothe. The self-talk in this stage sounds like, it's okay. I'm here with you. I understand. It sounds like, even when I'm feeling or thinking X, I accept myself. I am still learning and growing. This is an opportunity to practice, fill in the blank. This kind of self-talk can be easier to practice and accept from yourself than mantras of forced positivity, like, I believe I'm amazing, or I can do anything I put my mind to. And there might be a place for those in your life, and that is fantastic. But there also might not be, and that's fine too. Because ultimately, you have to sort through the multitude of tools that are available to you and pick ones that serve your needs, growth, and journey. I have found self-compassion to be one of the most valuable resources in my toolbox. It's a mentality that we work to develop through practice over time. I will also say that a side effect of self-compassion practices is a boost in self-esteem. We learn to trust ourselves. We build confidence in our ability to care for ourselves and walk through challenging situations. It increases our sense of worthiness to match that same value that we would hold for all of humanity and all of the people we know and love and all of creation. And we start to show greater mercy and kindness to others when we understand that we're all walking this crooked path together. I want to end with a thoughtful quote by an author. Her name is Lori Deschene. So just pause, take a deep breath. If you're able to, close your eyes, drop your shoulders, relax your jaw and your forehead, and listen. We can't hate ourselves into a version of ourselves that we can love. Choose self-compassion, dear ones. Thank you so much for listening, and please share this podcast with one new person today. And remember, each little step is progress.